afternoon. My name is Deepak Biscuitwala and I am the host for today's webinar. Our webinar is on organizational culture change. Before I introduce our lovely speaker today, I want to just mention that we encourage all our attendees to ask the question. And if you have any question, on the GoToWebinar on the right side panel, there is a section called question. You can put your question over there. And at the end of the webinar, we will allow 15 minutes for answering all your questions. Now, to earn your continuing education or recertification unit, you have to be on the webinar for 45 minutes. And we will award that 0.1 recertification unit to you after attending 45 minutes. So, and we have our two guests today, Brooks Kedar and Marilyn Monda. They both are helping me to facilitate this webinar. By saying that, let me introduce our speaker today, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones is a leadership psychology and performance optimization expert specialized in the integration of emotional, social, cultural, cognitive, organizational competencies with process and quality improvement. He provides leadership, mentoring, coaching, consultation on high-performance team development, multicultural analysis and design, organizational development, transformational technology analysis, and performance optimization. Dr. Jones has provided over $1 billion in cost savings, cost avoidance, and revenue generation for his client, employers, sponsors. He is a senior executive with over 25 years of full-time corporate experience, including 5 years full-time experience serving at senior executive levels, such as Chief Executive Officer, Executive Vice President, Corporate Vice President, Chief Information Officer, Chief Technology Officer in organizations with annual budget over $100 million, and also in nonprofit and elected appointed position. He is a regional level Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award examiner, senior member and past chapter vice president of Society of Manufacturing Engineers, and a vice chair in a human development and leadership division of American Society for Quality. He is also the CEO and research director for Saniata Group. So please welcome Dr. Mark Jones for Organizational Culture Change webinar. Mark.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. So, today, obviously, I'm going to be talking about organizational culture change, and specifically, I want to focus on leadership structures, power and accountability, and roles. So the purpose, next slide. The purpose of this will be to introduce a cultural lens and then to provide 2 or 3 models. And as I'm going through the models, please write down your questions so that I can address them. So the 3 models.
Deepak, you need to advance the slide.
I am trying, Brooke.
Oh. This is Brooks to the audience. We've had a multitude of technological problems here.
Okay.
Good. We've got the next slide, the purpose slide.
Sorry, Mark.
No problem. Okay, are we on it?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, there will be three models that I'll be discussing. One is called single point accountability, and that one will be fairly simple. One is called responsibility, accountability, and authority. That one will be a little more complicated. Aha, and I can now see the clock. Hold on.
There we go. So, can you mute me on that side, please?
Deepak, I think your video might be causing the feedback.
Mark's on the phone and also on the computer.
And my phone is now muted.
That's not helping. Try muting the computer microphone. There you go.
Yep. Okay. So we're on cultural lens. So a couple quick things about culture. Culture, as it says on the slide, is a subjective collective identity. What I mean by that is that culture trumps family of origin and it trumps our own self-identity. So if you think of an Olympian and an Olympian in training, what happens is that they have an image of themselves, they carry an image of their family, but the thing that drives their behavior ultimately is culture. So as an Olympian, there's a saying that says, once an Olympian, always an Olympian. So it is a collective identity that we take on. And that means that it incorporates, all sorts of beliefs, all sorts of attitudes, etc. So culture is important because it drives our behaviors. If you're in an organization, you can sense, and actually you can probably name the characteristics of the organization that you would say really drive the organization and then impact you as an individual. Next slide, please. So, how do you start to identify what the culture is? How do you identify how it is sustained? Well, there's two ways. One is to look at an org chart, and that gives you an understanding of an organizational culture. The other is to actually do research into what is called the grapevine. I think you're probably all familiar with that. And there was research done back in the 90s that had a pretty interesting and ultimately not surprising result. It was that the fastest way to get information communicated across an organization, regardless of whatever the size of the organization, was to use the grapevine. So the grapevine turns out to be the most powerful way that information crosses the organization, and the grapevine is the probably strongest invisible element of organizational culture. The thing to note is that what we will be talking about today, power and accountability and roles, those are all products of organizational culture. You could drop it down a level of abstraction and say power, accountability, and roles are also products if you are in a family. It's the same type of situation. So there's interesting research that came out of the emotional intelligence world a number of years ago that basically talked about emotional behavioral norms. And it was empirical research, which was nice, and the bottom line was that leaders set the emotional behavioral norms, which means that leaders of an organization set they are reinforcing the culture, and the culture is informing them. So leaders establish and reinforce the culture. Now, how we feel emotionally and how we act obviously determines our performance and our outcomes. Next slide, please. Now, this is related to quality. Because quality is all about optimizing, achieving optimal results. Well, that means if we want to get different individual results, performance outcomes, etc., we have to change the culture. So when lean manufacturing system started to talk about culture back in the 90s and in the early 2000s, they were really addressing the heart of process improvement. And in some of my own research a few years ago, most process improvement initiatives, and I'm putting quotes around initiatives, fail. And the ones that don't fail immediately tend to last only around 18 months. And the reason why they fail is because they're ultimately not considered in the culture, and so the efforts are abandoned. To counter that requires cultural change. It requires emotional behavioral changes, first by the leaders, and as that gets believed by people, then they will change their behaviors. So it's all about cultural awareness, and it's all about transformation. And because of that, if you're understanding how to work with culture, then that is how you achieve your process improvement results, i.e. quality. Next slide, please. So here's a couple useful definitions. And the fourth one down there is for those of you that kind of get geeky around engineering or physics. So in the work I do, I make a clear distinction between leadership and management. They're not the same thing. Leadership is about people. It's about relationship. And management is about process. So it would be kind of odd if I walked up to a computer and said, I'm going to lead you. It would be kind of odd if I walked up to a process and said, I'm going to lead you. I'm going to manage the process. Now, things can get dicey if I try to quote unquote manage people the same way I manage a process. There are different dimensions. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we go forward tonight. So you lead people and you manage processes. Now, a key part of what we're talking about tonight is, basically how does change happen, right? So, this presentation talks about power, and then it breaks it up because we're really in the leadership context. So it talks about power. In leadership, that's the relational ability, right? And it talks about the two elements of power, which are authority and influence. So I use the word here the word coercive when I talk about the relational ability to coerce authority. I use the word coerce in a neutral way. That is, there are consequences if you go against authority. So therefore, it's a coercive process. Neither good nor bad. It can be good or bad, but in and of itself, it's a neutral concept. And influence is all about being able to persuade people. So power, therefore, is either through authority or it's through persuasion. Next slide, please. I forget my speed about to come up.
Sorry, I have a lot of technology problem currently. Okay, I'm on the next slide.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. So let's talk about single point accountability. You use single point accountability to basically figure out who's responsible, accountable, and who has the authority in a relationship or in a process. Now, single point accountability says there's only one person authorized at any time for any task. Now, some folks have said, well, doesn't that go counter to leaderless groups, to self-managing teams? And actually, it doesn't operationally. It does conceptually, but it doesn't operationally. Self-managed teams inevitably, because we are human and we are in culture, inevitably people become the point of accountability. A person will lead something. People go to person X to achieve something. So what the single point accountability analysis, what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify, if it's a loose network, you're trying to identify, well, who's the it person? And if you're organizing an activity, I would definitely suggest that you exercise single point accountability up front in your design. So co-leadership at its best, you observe it when two people seem to seamlessly almost finish each other's sentences, finish each other's work in public. Now, what they have developed is a protocol that allows them to tag each other so that they are aware pretty explicitly, okay, I'm taking on this piece or you're taking on that piece. And when co-leaders design, they usually or almost inevitably design for each of their strengths. So those are the pieces they take on. Again, single point of accountability says be clear about that at all times and you avoid a lot of headaches. For those of you that have children, have seen children, have raised children, or have seen children being raised, one of the dynamics that occurs is if they don't get the right answer from one parent, they go to the other. Now, if the parents have in fact split up their duties or they are co-leading, then that strategy doesn't work. Of course, it also happens in cultural change within organizations. You don't like the result, you try to ask somebody else. So that's the importance of SPA. Next slide, please. This one is slightly more complicated. And it's actually fairly simple to execute, although sometimes it can seem a little onerous. Basically, what RAA says is you want explicitly to know what the scope of a commitment that you or your organization or that an organization that you're interacting with is making, how the reporting is to occur, and the authority by either a person or a team, but bearing in mind we're thinking single point accountability. So again, for any given task, be it a leadership task or a process management task, you are getting an explicit description of commitment, agreement, and the rights associated with taking on the assignment. When that doesn't happen is when work tends to not get done or get done correctly. So RIA, I think, is an important team concept, process, practice for all quality folks. And I know you're all high quality folks. Next slide, please. So how do you figure out where to look for RIA? Well, responsibility and accountability is always inside an operational agreement. It's always inside a contract. That is essentially what an agreement or a contract does. Now, how do you figure out authority? Well, again, if it is if you're looking for formal authority, that's an org structure. So say you find an org chart. And if you're looking for informal authority, i.e. you're trying to figure out who people go to actually help them form their opinions, the grapevine, then you have to build an influence diagram, or you have to find one. Next slide, please. Responsibility is pretty straightforward, and I'm going to read the first couple words off the slide. It is a moral or legal commitment. So you may have a legal commitment to do something, and you may actually have a moral commitment to do something that is very meaningful to you, very important. Raising your kids is both a moral and a legal commitment, as an example. So responsibility is pretty much commitment. RIA says make sure that it's clear. A lot of mischief occurs when it's not clear. So at an individual level, if you've ever heard of or written some type of declaration of your own authentic presence, or who you are in the world, your stand, that's a good way of seeing responsibility in an RIA. In the organizational level, it shows up in the typical vision, mission, values, and then of course it drops down into the operational areas of tasks. Next slide, please. So accountability is all about agreement. It can be an individual or it can be an organization, a collective thing. And really, the part to pay attention to when you are writing or looking for accountability is to comb out, tease out what is expected, what are the perceived experiences, right? So there's expectations, then there's observable behaviors, and if it's beyond behavior, there are certain actions that need to be laid out. So you just kind of tease out those elements. And again, you'll find these types of things in authentic purpose statements but at the org level, you'll find them in the performance commitment statement. If it's for you as an individual, it might be in your own individual development plan. If it's for an organization, it might be in the interface documents between the organization and another organization, such as clients or suppliers. Next slide, please. Authority. So I use the word coercive. Again, it's coercive. So authority is coercive because it's enforced. It is the right for someone, something, someone, somebody to give an order or direction that must be followed by others. So if you are an authorized leader in a system, i.e. a formal leader, then there are certain rights that you have, such as to give an order to someone and they have to follow it, or else they are at risk. They can lose their job, they blah, blah, blah. That's why authority is coercive. That doesn't mean it's negative. It simply means that it's not self-generated. So one of the things that we pay attention to in the leadership development world is what is the level of competency of a person that has authority or an organization. If they are emotionally and socially or culturally aware, things are probably going to go pretty good. If they don't have a high understanding, say collectively, or an individual is not aware of their impact on others, things can go pretty bad, but they still have authority. Next slide, please. So this is going to be the most complicated piece. And basically, you use SADA to figure out organizational roles. So SADA analysis allows you to map authority and influence flows, or is the process of mapping authority and influence flows. And again, if it's authority, then that means it's formal organizational roles and networks, and that's the org chart. And that org charts, quote unquote, depict how things are supposed to be done. Now, I can't imagine anyone on this webinar recognizing that things don't actually get done precisely the way an organizational chart says they do. So all the ways that things actually get done are in the informal organizational roles and networks. Next chart, please. So putting on a QA hat, let's say you're going in and you're being asked to help an organization improve its quality. Well, what you really want to know is the condition, the state of the relationships, and then you also want to know the state of the processes. So if quality is an issue in an organization, a company, it's probably because there is something that has gone on in which a recognition that poor quality is actually impacting the existence of the organization. So when quality is amped up, it's because there's trauma in the system around failing in some way. That I call existential crisis. So when you are doing a SADA, you are paying attention to who are the actors, if you will, in this play, right? who are all the players and what are all the different partnerships that form. So I call those relational ecosystems. And of course, you're looking at the formal and informal roles. And obviously, it's pretty easy. In general, it's pretty easy to find out the formal roles, and it's a lot more involved to figure out the informal roles. Next slide, please. Formal roles. If you've experienced any organizational life, you'll be familiar with these. So, you've got your visible leaders. And you've got your visible managers, process managers. They execute, they're doers, the roles are presented and described, you see them in the org chart. So, what you're paying attention to around formal roles is specific authority and vertical reporting relationships. That is, I have the power, quote unquote, the authority to mandate that you do something. My boss has the authority to mandate that I do something. So you're paying attention to those vertical relationships. Now, formal networks depict, that authority, and again, the informal organizations are not usually represented in the organizational chart. So the thing to remember is that whether we're operating by authority or influence, or whether you're in a system that's operating by authority or influence or both, power is what you're really paying attention to. So in formal authority roles, it's a power over behavior. Now, you've probably seen sometimes that in power over dynamics can get gnarly. Someone doesn't want to be told what to do. Brings up something from childhood, whatever. You just kind of know that there are reactions that come from family origin and culture around how authority is exercised. Okay, next slide, please. So, what are the SATA roles? What we're looking for, and this comes from Daryl Connor, and you can see a long time ago he was playing with this. I encourage you to read his work if you haven't. What we're really looking for is, these are the SATA. You've got a sponsor, and so if something needs to be done, if something is going to be done in an organization, it has to have a sponsor. And there's two forms of the sponsor. One is called the initiating sponsor. And that could be, let's say the CEO says, we're going to reduce blah, 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 process flow hours by such and such. And that is a direct mandate to the people that report directly to the CEO. Now, they will pass that down. This is all vertical systems, right? They will pass that down through the organization. Now, one thing to note is that a sponsor can only be a sponsor over the people that they have direct authority. So if your organization has 5 quote-unquote levels of management, quote-unquote, I'm using levels of management even though I don't like the term, the CEO is not actually the sponsoring authority for you if you are down on the floor doing the work. Your boss is the sponsoring authority. So whoever has the direct, immediate capacity to hire and fire you is the sponsor, or to hire and fire. So sponsors have hire and fire authority. Now, beyond initiating, once something gets up and running, it tends to switch over to another type of sponsor, a different organization, a different person, and that's the sustaining. So that's sponsor. The agent, which we call the orchestrator, is sort of they can be the consultant or the coach to the sponsors. Sometimes they may actually be the people when we get into the informal network, okay? They may actually be the heavy influencers, sometimes not, but they orchestrate things. They grease the relational skids, if you will. So the target is either the person or persons that are implementing, or they're the persons or persons that are getting something implemented on them. And then you have advocates who have no authority whatsoever. They have a really great idea, and they're always in search of a sponsor. Now, sometimes QA people end up being in that role. As a QA person, you develop a systems view, systems lens, you see something, you go, if we did it this way, this is what would happen, and it would be great. At that point, you're an advocate. If you can actually make it happen, then you're a sponsor. Next slide, please. So, the informal roles, the influence roles. The only way to really figure this one out is to pay attention. And you can go around and you can kind of see who people gather around. And now, there are times where someone who is an influence leader might have a formal role, but then again, they might not. So the important thing is to note that they don't have authority over the people that they're influencing. So people are making a choice to follow what they're saying. And when you're trying to map that out, what you're finding is a lot of horizontal connections. This person knows that person. So if you actually just build a human relational diagram, this person knows that person, this person knows that person, this person, one way to figure out who your influence leaders are is that they are probably the hubs amongst number of groups of people. So 18 people are connected to this one person. And so if you start pulling on those threads, you're probably identifying your influence leaders. Next slide, please. So in the influence leaders world, I describe them as three types of folks. So when I was talking earlier about the research that the grapevine is the fastest communication system, bar none, in any organization, the grapevine is really made up of opinion leaders. That is, think of someone that when you're mulling something over and you're trying to make a decision, you go to them to get their take. So opinion leaders lead opinions. Now, opinion leaders own the grapevine because of their connectivity. So if you can visualize, again, a network of relationships, and you see these hubs where this person has a lot of connections. So that is actually also a map of the grapevine. Now, if you are a leader, a formal leader in an organization, it's probably really helpful not to antagonize the grapevine, not to antagonize the opinion leaders. If you are trying to get quality done in an organization where the grapevine is being antagonized, then one of your cultural interventions is to figure out how to, if you will, elevate the opinion leaders into a positive light, because they actually are holding the pulse of the organization. Then there's another type, there's the social connectors. And the way I talk about these are the people that if they invite other people will go. So a social connector could reach out to me and say, hey, we're having this thing today. I may not really want to go, but since it's them asking, I'll go. And social connectors can be, they can also be gatekeepers into the formal system. So people that are in administrative roles, people that schedule calendars even, they are social connectors, or can be. And so you want to pay attention to them when you're trying to figure out what's going on in an organization. In fact, you want to interview them. And then there's a third group, which I call the shaman. And these are the people that you may have met them, you're not sure. They're always around the edges. There are always names that might be whispered. So when things get rough and tumble in an organization, and you start hearing, oh, well, such and such is over there working with or talking with such and such. And the shaman are the ones that are really focused on doing interventions into the emotional system of the organization. Next slide, please. So what does that look like in terms of SI? Well, a sponsor, if they're an informal sponsor, then they can control access to resources, i.e., you can think in more of a social connector or opinion leader role. So they know the people that know how to get the work done. And therefore, from a SADA perspective, they're actually sponsoring the work. And things can be kind of gnarly if the informal leaders are sponsoring work that is not wanted by the formal leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's the things you pay attention to. Say the agent role is the same. It's they're orchestrating things. In the informal game, they might really be doing a lot more relational orchestrating. In Lean, I think we call them water spiders. They are connected to the array of activities, and so they get information from across the system and they integrate it. Then you've got targets, and again, you've got advocates. So those are the basic models, and what I'd love to do is to entertain questions or take entertaining questions. So I'm going to ask my partners on the panel, how do I see that?
So what's going to happen is Deepak is going to look at any questions that have been typed into the question box, and let me encourage anyone in the audience to type questions into the question box for Mark. While we're waiting, Mark, let me ask you a little bit about when you were talking about Daryl Connor and the roles of the sponsor and the agent, can you talk a little bit more about the agent, the black belt, or the green belt, or the master black belt as an agent?
Sure. So in this case, particularly, let's go with the black belt level. A Six Sigma black belt is probably consulting to the function, and their role as agent is to increase, if you will, the level of awareness amongst the people getting the job done as to what the correct tools and I'll even precede that. What are the right questions to be asking is really the level that they would be performing as an agent. And the reason why they're black belt and not no belt is because they learned that there are certain things, certain patterns that cause disruption. There are certain things that make quality bad. And so first and foremost, they're pointing that out. They know what questions to ask. They know what, they also can interpret what the sponsor is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. When I was doing active project management myself, the sponsor, and still is on any project that I coach, the sponsor is one of the most important success factors that a black belt or a master black belt or a green belt can have. If you have a really good relationship with your sponsor, you can guide them. They're the one with all the power. You know, they have all the ability to make the changes that need to be made, and they hold the vision and can let you know if that vision needs to change. So I love that you put this in here, because I think it's a really critical X for success in a project.
And there is something also about facilitators. Facilitators are leaders,
right?
And so it is very interesting how we show facilitators in the org charts. So we give them a slight taint, perhaps a slight taint of formal authority, and they have a whole ton of informal authority.
Yeah,
informal influence.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I was able to pick up a note that said, you know, there are teams that took teams made team decisions and accountability as a group. Yeah, I get it. And they probably were able to do that because the person they were taking their cue from, the facilitator, was actually setting the emotional and behavioral norms for the group.
Yeah. Deepak, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do have. But before I start, you know, publishing this question and asking to Mark, and make sure with the audience that today we had some technical difficulties, so thank you for your patience. And we have a few questions here for Mark, and I think this is a very interesting one that one of the audience has commented, you know, looking for the word consequences, no accountability without consequences, both good and bad, or is it power, accountability, and roles determine culture? That is a cause and versus effect. Which come first, culture or power or accountability or roles?
Yeah. So let me go with, first with, yes, consequences. That's all about that. When I use the word coercion, that's what I mean, consequences, either good or bad. Which comes first? Culture solidifies the roles. So, when I think of it as a human being, how do I live my life out? It's an inside-out game. There's me, my intra-personal world, my inner world. There's me in relationship with another person, right? So that's interpersonal. Then there's me in relationship to a collective. Well, that collective ends up having, in developmental theory and developmental research, that collective ends up having more influence, if you will, than my dyadic relationships, my family, or even what I thought myself. So I would say that we experience life as an inside-out game, and it functions on us as an outside-in, as culture drives the group behaviors, drives the individual behaviors. So if someone were in every system has both SADA formal and SADA informal roles and dynamics going on. There are some systems that are heavily hierarchical in their structure. So that is how the work is supposed to get done. Now, the more hierarchical, the more heavy the structure is, the more attention needs to be paid to the informal network. So if you are in an organization and it is in need, then the change is going to come from the informal network. The change is probably actually going to come from agents in both SADA roles interacting with sponsors.
So Mark,
answer another question.
Sorry, Mark, but there is a follow-up question on that. Is culture difficult to replicate?
Say that again.
Is culture difficult to replicate?
It's harder to replicate culture than it is to form or modify culture. Why? Because culture is also, it's a collective response to an environment, right? To that which is outside the culture. So if there are characteristics of a culture that you want to see replicated, then the best way to do it is to behave against that value system, as in behave into that value system, advocate into that value system. And if you are a leader, then you lead through that value system. So you replicate the values and behaviors you want because you're setting the norms. If you are not the leader, but you can somehow find somebody that can influence the leader, then the conversation has to once again be around the values that are, the narratives, if you will, the stories in the system, the stories in the culture that are setting the behavioral norms. You change those narratives, and you replicate the ones you want elsewhere, and you discard the ones that aren't useful to you.
Well, Mark, again, there is a follow-up question on that audience has asked that I think you need to make a clear distinction between coercion and consequences. Coercion usually precedes behavior, action, while consequences follow behaviors and action.
That's an excellent description. Actually, I don't think I need to make it. I think the distinction was just made. And I would call out the name of the person who made it, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that. So yes, you know who you are. Excellent distinction.
Mark, I have a comment on replicating cultures. Going back a long time, my father was an executive with Ford, and the culture of Ford was very, very much like the culture of GM. I recall, like, people in automobile companies only saw people in automobile companies in their social network. It might be a different company, but it would make sense because so many of the external conditions were the same.
Yeah.
And people move from company to company.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mark,
Go ahead.
sorry, because of the time limitation, I have a few more questions.
Okay.
And the other question that came across is, what is the base point of intervention in the SATA system? I worked in a formally hierarchical management organization, but it looks to me that we are really a SATA.
I think that one is I think I answered that one in terms of how you actually, you basically using cultivate, you have to cultivate the relationships on the informal network. Again, fastest route of communication in every organization is the grapevine. So something I used to do when I was doing large-scale interventions is my first week on the job, I would ask people starting at the top and then going all the way down as far as I could in a week, who are the people that help you form opinions? Who are the opinion leaders? And then I would interview the opinion leaders. And the opinion leaders, in a lean sense, were the water spiders. So I would start putting up in the review room the models, and they would come in and work them and work them and work them and work them and seeing what each other are saying. That itself, with bringing the system together through the informal roles, was a dramatic intervention, because as soon as the formal system saw it, what they saw were solutions to issues that they had, and they also saw takes that they were blind to due to position and culture.
So Mark, I need to ask you this question because the question I'm going to ask is basically asked by Human Development and Leadership President, Wanda.
Yeah.
And the question is, in cross-functional projects, many times they will have more than one sponsor. How would you go about aligning them? Now, if you don't answer, he might fire me.
It's sort of like if it's in fact a matrix situation, if it is a matrix, let me put it that way, if it is a matrix situation, then you need to actually basically do an RAA, because a matrix says that, you're probably not being evaluated by both organizations on the same criteria. So that's kind of at the individual level. If there is cross-sponsorship, then you're actually looking, let's say there's 5 directors who are the sponsors of this activity. Now you have to go to the informal network of those 5 directors, because one of them at least is a primary opinion leader of that group. One of them is a connector. Maybe 2 or 3 of them are actually checked out of the process. So you create the SADA network for the informal authority, right? And that becomes your in. And typically in a project, someone will say, well, yeah, I'm really tight with such and such, and so they're letting me know what we need to be doing on this project. It's rare that you have, let's say, 5 sponsors that are all on the same page, but it's also rare that you have 5 sponsors that are totally not on the same page and the project continues. Now, another intervention, which is a little trickier, is to actually get because this is a sponsorship issue, right? To actually turn the problem back to the sponsors. This is the level that they're dealing with. How are we taking direction from you, and who and why to what end? And have them solve it.
So guys, I think we need to watch the clock. It's a little past 7.
Yes, and that's where I'm gonna closing out this webinar. But before I do, I have one more question, because that I need to ask. I want to make all our audience happy. So the question is, can change in culture be scheduled with specific outcomes being determined prior to enacting?
Yes, but what you're specifying is behaviors. So if someone, as a leader, let's say in the organization you're dealing with, I'll just use kind of a loaded language. People are rude to each other in meetings. Mm-hmm. So respect is a culture word, right? Respect is a culture word. So if people are rude to each other in meetings, then there are probably cultural violations going on kind of regularly, right? Because every person is also bringing in their other cultures. So if you're aware of that, then, and you're setting up something, and you say, here are the operating agreements. Here is how we agreed ahead of time when we initiate this, and when the people that are executing it are populating it. These are the higher level operating agreements. We will, simple one, we will always pause, and we'll give it a 5 count. We'll pause 5 seconds before someone speaks, even if you're super excited, right? Simple things. We agree to use I language when expressing an opinion. We agree to paraphrase back to each other before giving an interpretation. We agree that if something hits us and we're having an emotional reaction, we agree to recognize that we're having an emotional reaction and not share the reaction on everybody, but to just say, just so you know, I'm a little triggered by what you said. I'm working it because I'm the one triggered, so I have to sort it out. Because people know when each other's triggered. So if we set the norm that we're admitting we're triggered, then it makes it okay to work it through individually. I need a timeout type of thing. So all those types of norms can be set ahead of time. And as the group convenes, if those are the high level, then they begin to flesh that out with, yeah, these are the norms that we as a specific team or a group of people who want to become a high performance team, these are the norms that we set. And then they learn how to practice those behaviors. Does that answer?
I hope you did answer that. Mark, again, you did very good job, even though we had some technical difficulties, but I think question and answer part was pretty good, along with your presentation. Brooks and Merlin, thank you for being a part of this panelist and helping me out. And from the audience perspective, we will send you survey. Please take a moment and fill out the survey, because that is very important for our division. And if you have any suggestion what next topics we need to present, please put in a comment box in the survey. And again, thank you very much for your time. I think it's for me the dinner time, so I gotta go. Any other comment from anyone? Brooks?
Well, I thought it was terrific. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. I have a deep interest in culture myself from a very different perspective, so look forward to seeing you in Houston, and we'll have a chance to talk.
And if there's a Wayne still out there, keep the conversation going, Wayne. I like your thinking.
And Mark, we have a couple of questions that I might email you, and possibly we can answer, might help audience that particularly question. So I will see what we have answered and we have not. I will let you that,
I love it.
Individually. Very good. Thank you very much. And this concludes our webinar. See you next time in September. That is around 2021. So another exit date.